Hi, I'm Myra Flynn, and I'm the only one humanizing Black stories by way of art.
This is Laura Cathcart Robbins, and this is the only one in the room, but I'm never the only one in this room because, as usual, my boyfriend, producer, and co host, Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hey, Hun. So today we're talking to Myra Flynn, and she's the host of Homegoings, a show that invites listeners to deeply consider what it means to be Black through the eyes of musicians, artists, experts, and regular old Black folk. So I want to start just by asking how you identify.
Racially or just in general?
Certainly racially, but in general as well.
Yeah. Well, my pronouns are she, her, hers. I identify as a mama to my daughter Avalon. She's 4. Um, I think as an artist, primarily, even in the world of journalism, I still find a way to art the whole thing. And as far as my race, my father is white and my mother is Black, but I personally have never been asked to or raised to kind of split those identities or worlds. In my household, I was just raised Black, so I identify as Black, and I also feel like that's how the world treats me. So I'm going to go ahead and call myself a Black woman.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what's happened recently in the news with former President Donald Trump and VP Kamala Harris, who is now the presumptive Democratic nominee for president. And there was, this whole flurry in the news about him basically taunting her for splitting her identity, right? That she had identified one way, which was with the racial identity of one parent, her mother, who's Indian, and then switched or turned Black to identify with her father, who is a Black Jamaican American. And so I wanted to first just ask you what your thoughts were around that, because I feel like what you just said speaks to that a lot.
Yes, well, as a journalist, it is not ethically okay for me to speak on politics, but I would say I can tease out the larger subject and some feelings about that regarding the split feelings. Like, isn't it all just a microcosm for the split feelings that can exist when being biracial, period? I made an episode for my podcast Homegoings called Never at Home, the
Mm-hmm.
biracial conundrum, and explored the journeys of 3 different biracial folks, one who's completely white passing, and a couple who have, pretty different perspectives on the whole thing, really wanting to embrace biracialness as a way of an ethnic identity front and center, and not having to choose a racial home. And then me, who's kind of offering my opinion on it as well. I think that we don't do this with other races necessarily. For instance, if somebody was from, I don't know, South America, or say somebody was Brazilian and combined that with an Asian ethnicity, is there as much pressure there to find a racial home? There's so much entrenched in the Jim Crow law and, the one drop rule, and how Blackness is categorized and stratified and identified and assigned, that people are still so interested in the bloodline and the gaze of the bloodline of Black people. And I think that pressure can be felt very strongly for biracial people, but there's also a privilege there when you're biracial, because your proximity to whiteness is closer. And so I think, like with Kamala Harris, I was kind of surprised to hear the conversation being as charged as Black and white biracialism seems to get people, riled up. But then again, not as surprised, because I think that Blackness tends to get people in their historical feelings either way and start demanding some answers, which is, it's 2024. I find it, interesting that still pops up for us.
Yeah, and I was thinking while you were talking that because you started off by saying, or actually you started off when I asked you how you identified, you said that basically like this is how the world sees you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for people who are biracial, black, black, I don't, yes, white and black, but it could be Indian and black, or Mexican and black, like whatever it might be, or Latina and black, Latino. um, that if the world sees you as one thing, it's very challenging to try to identify as something else, right?
Right. Right.
And,
Well, I mean, that was the one drop rule, right? Was that you were assigned the subordinate race, and the subordinate race at the time was black. It still is.
yeah.
And the darker melanation you have in this country and in around the globe writ large, actually, the worse you're treated. So people are very interested in that extra melanin going on in your skin, and where it came from and why it's there.
And the texture of hair as well.
Yes.
And so I was telling Scott before we started that the first episode I listened to of Homegoings was with Rachel. Is it
Dolezal.
Dolezal, thank you. I don't know. I have a mental block against her last name for some reason. And can you just talk a little bit about who she is and why that interview was because it really got a lot of traction, I think, that particular interview.
Yes. Well, Rachel Dolezal's story is not new. So I would want to say that first. Like, it's not breaking news to interview Rachel Dolezal. She finds herself in the headlines quite a bit. But in 2015, Rachel Dolezal was the president of the Spokane, Washington chapter of the NAACP. And at the time had been receiving like a lot of threats, like racial threats against her. She was a Black woman, light-skinned, freckled, curly hair. And kind of went on the record as saying, like, look at all these threats that are happening to me, and people are sending, horrific things to my office. This is proof that like racism is still very much happening in Spokane. And she got a lot of questions around that time because of all of like the dark-skinned Black women who were also working in the NAACP and working as activists in that space. We're not receiving the same amount of hate that Rachel was. And so, there was a lot of fire, around her, surrounding her. And so there was some local press, and one local news agency just popped up with a camera one day and asked her just straight up, "Are you African American?" And Rachel just froze, didn't say yes or no, turned from the camera and walked away, which I know from interviewing her now, she, highly regrets. But after that, both of Rachel's parents came out and quote unquote outed her. This is the phrase that is used. It is not my phrase, but outed her as being born white, Caucasian. But if you ask Rachel how she identifies, she will say, end quote, "I've always identified racially as human and culturally as Black." And it was a really big story, like not just because like, whoa, nobody's ever, I mean, there's so many layers to it, but nobody's ever, I guess, like proclaimed to want Blackness,
Right.
I think, in a way, right? Like bad enough to want to pass as Black, right? The whole concept behind passing is that you'd always want to pass as white because that's where the privilege lies, right? But to have somebody who wanted to pass as Black and was more than willing to go along or invite all of the discrimination and the hardships and the activism and the brutal like lift that comes with being a Black woman, was more than willing to invite that into her life, was pretty astounding, I think. And then also, she kind of started a movement, which I don't think she stands behind after speaking to her. And I don't think she would say, like, this is what I was out to do. She was just trying to live her life as the Black woman she believes, not believed, but present tense, believes she is. But a movement was created around this called transracialism, where a lot of people were like, well, if you can be transgender, why can't you be transracial? And so Whether Rachel likes it or not, the lens kind of moved off of her and turned more into this giant thing of like, we can be whatever we want to be. And Rachel has said some things in interviews with me and others that, you know, we all come from the African diaspora. We all have a Black mother somewhere in our history. And like, you should be able to decide your proximity to your Blackness, no matter how you were born. So I wasn't so much interested in interviewing her for the sensationalism of that. I was more interested in deeper questions about like mental health and personal upbringing, because I think that how you were raised and you know, how you look at how you see yourself based on how you're basically, I think environment has a lot to do with how you're raised, and that's been proven, and how you see yourself and how you present. And a lot of your identity is wrapped up in that as well. And I think that a lot of people just came down so hard on Rachel as far as like, you know, how dare you? But I don't think everybody was so upset that I don't think everybody just asked the questions, which really are, how did you get here? like, isn't that interesting? Like, what happened? And, you know, you'll have to listen to the episode, but I learned a lot about how she got there, and wasn't there to disagree or agree with it, but just to listen. And I think it's a pretty fascinating story. And I don't think transracialism has like taken off in any massive way since then. But it did take off a little, and that's interesting enough, like that people would want to delve into other races that they identify with culturally.
Well, and it certainly became a conversation that not only was I a part of, but I heard, you know, going on around me for a while after that. And I actually haven't heard it as much recently. But, you know, when you were saying that, you know, being Black usually equals, you know, poor treatment, not only here and in other places around the world. So why would anybody choose that, you know, who was born, you know, if she was born white, she was born Caucasian. So why would she choose to be Black if it wasn't like, I can't help it. Like, this is who I am. And I was thinking about that same thing the other day. I was on call it a Black girl magic dog walk. We're down to 2 dogs now. The other one's passed away, but we still do our walk. And I was like, you know, in this whole thing, I'm just bringing it back to Kamala for a second, because I want to go back to what you just said about how you were raised, how one is raised in the environment. Because I want to talk about how you were raised, but it's as if being Black would be an advantage to running for president. And I just don't think that's the case. I don't think that's ever been the case. So I don't know why the thought idea, like if she could choose, right? If Kamala could choose, why she would choose Black. That doesn't make any sense to me. Clearly, to me, she's always identified as a Black woman, but and also not neglected her Indian heritage as well. But I just think it's funny that these perceptions come up, and it's like, no, she's not this, or she wasn't this, and now she's claiming this as though, like I said, it's going to offer an advantage to her, when it doesn't really ever offer an advantage to anybody, except for maybe, you know, in certain parts of Africa, you know, where I've been, and I feel very much a part of, in a way, and feel very, very American in a way as well, and then feel that separation. But that being there where the majority of the people are Black, I could see where maybe it's an advantage being Black there, and in certain places, but nowhere else I've been have I seen it as an advantage. So I'm just glad you brought that up. And I wanted to move in now to, so your dad, you said, I wrote in my notes that he's Irish, not like American Irish, right? That he's from Ireland.
Well, he's not from Ireland, but he's like, I think, second generation or something
Right.
like that. And yeah, last name Flynn, all of his brothers and sisters are like Tammy, Tommy, Tim, like on and on, Teresa. Yeah, just very, very Irish. Yes.
So tell me a little bit about how he grew up and where he grew up.
My dad grew up a little bit of everywhere. You know, he had a really tough upbringing that I've kind of parceled together as I've gotten older because a lot of the family didn't want to speak about it. But, you know, I don't know, Irish Catholic, alcoholic parents, you know, in and out of situations where he was raising himself sometimes and then not others. And I think really was the one in the family to kind of be the caretaker for everyone. But when he was older and life took shape with a little more autonomy for him, he was in Rockford, Illinois, which is where he met my mother. And Rockford, I mean, I'm not sure what the stats are now, but I don't think it's changed that much. But Rockford really is predominantly Black area. At the time it had like, or not at the time, I don't think, but it has a history of factories. So Chrysler, for instance, was born out of Rockford, Illinois. And so there were a lot of factory workers, a lot of Black folks. My mom was raised there. Her family was originally from Talladega, Alabama. And so I think that she and my dad met by way of environment, right? Like these things that we're talking about. And she was not the first Black woman that he'd ever been with. And he was not coming from this sparkling white, you know, I mean, obviously he's a white man, so he's privileged, but like he wasn't coming from a very great home or situation either. And so a lot was in common with their environment at the time, which I think has a lot to do with how I view myself as being biracial. Like there weren't two worlds to split, you know, in a lot of ways. There was a lot of poverty in both of their upbringings. There was a lot of scrappiness when it came to wanting to be somebody and the survival mentality of how they both raised me. And there wasn't really a lot of like frivolous time of like, would you like to discuss like your bloodline, Myra? And if you align with this or that or whatever, like my Black dad was listening to Motown right alongside my mother. We were eating the soul food she was cooking, and that was what was up.
Right, right. I love that idea. How big was your mother's family?
Yeah, she had three brothers, or two brothers, one sister, and her mom. Her dad actually, oh gosh, he won like the Illinois State Lottery way back in the day and then left. It was like peace. Which
Wait,
is
so
not
he
funny,
got the
I'm
money
sure.
and
Yeah,
then he was out?
that's my understanding from what I
Wow.
again have pieced together over the years. But
Right.
yeah, essentially just grew up without her dad. And my mother is brilliant. She's you know, just retired after like 30 some odd years, 38 years being a Black female dean of a military college. She has her doctorate. She's just really, really brilliant and just worked really, really hard. One of those folks who got out of their circumstances by way of like beating the system, joining it and beating it.
Wow.
So that's her story. And yeah, she's a beautiful person to talk to as well if you're ever looking for another interesting woman.
I mean, that's such a cool story.
Yeah,
That
she's been
dean of
in
a
the only
military
one in
college?
she's been the only one in all the rooms.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
imagine so.
Yeah.
So what about dad? What did dad end up doing?
Yeah, so my dad's always been a builder. He never got a college education, but he started a very specific like custom, let me see if I can say this right because I am not a wood person. I'm trying. A custom hard wood plank flooring business. Which if you
Dad
know,
will
you
be
know.
proud. Dad will be
I was thinking that too. I was like, oh, he'd be proud. She went for it.
Yeah, very niche from what I understand. Like the boards in your floor, if they're made of like really beautiful wood and they're wide plank, as opposed to like the little narrow planks, are more highly sought after and milled like with exact specificity. And, you know, growing up in Vermont, which is where they moved to get away from all the heat that was coming to them as an interracial couple in Rockford.
So tell me a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it just wasn't pretty. I mean, I've experienced it within our own family in the little bit that I've gotten to know my family members because I was kept out of a lot of knowing them. But there was a lot of disagreement about my mother marrying a white man, and certainly, like, just age old, ripe old, good old boy feelings about my dad marrying a black woman. But at the same time, my Irish father's brothers had like racism around them in their upbringing, and they all married women of color.
Stop. Really?
No, yes. And I
That's
love that.
amazing.
I love that backflip, because it's like, we're probably just going to like continue to love who we want to love no matter what.
Yes. I love that. Wait, and were they all in Rockford?
It's really tough to answer that, Laura, because they had a lot of like foster home division. Some of them joined military, some of them left permanently and then came back. There was like suicides that happened. It's like really hard for me to talk about my dad's upbringing in a binary way. My mother, I can talk about it more so. There was a hood, there was an area, there was a place, there was a mom at home, and there were siblings. And my dad was worse off.
Yeah. Yeah. And then he found this craft, this woodcraft, and he was great at it. So he created this niche. I mean, he participated, right, in this niche industry. And did he, besides trying to get away from the racism that existed in Rockford, or the heat that you said, was there any other reason, like why Vermont? Because it's like from a very, very black town to one of the whitest states in the nation.
I really feel like I'm speaking for them at this point. So I just want to put it out there that like I can like tell you like what I understand. But I mean, I would probably fact check with them. I think that from my understanding, they had one like couple of friends that were from Vermont who invited them periodically to go and visit. And it was really nice for them to get out in like the middle of nowhere, to just not have to deal with any of the stuff that was coming their way. But I think it was my dad who officially wanted to move there. And I think my mom kind of, my understanding, just like, went along for it and was happy to also leave the circumstances, especially once I was in her belly. And they found like 94 acres of land for dirt cheap at the time. And my dad built a house before he was a custom wide plank flooring guy.
Yes.
He was a builder. So he built houses, and he built our house, which was I've got more wood words. Let's say it's a timber frame, post and beam timber frame home, which is like, I don't know if you've seen them, but like big beams, not a lot of nails. It's pretty cool way of building a house. So that house is still there. My mom lives in it. They are no longer together after 27 years. When they were much older, they got divorced. But, I really think my mom struggled there at first. I remember her coming home with a lot of black eyes, car accidents, because she was trying to figure out how to drive in the snow on these like dirt roads and these back roads. And I think it was just a really hard transition. But now you couldn't take her out of Vermont if you paid her all the money in the world. She loves it there. I mean, we're trying to figure out what she wants to do when she gets older, and she does not want to come out here to LA with me. So
that's so funny.
Yeah, now she's a Vermonter.
I thought you were going to say she was coming home from black eyes from fights, and I was like, oh no,
good God, no, not at all.
But from trying to teach herself how to drive in the snow, especially at night, that is no joke.
And Chicago has a bunch of snow, but it's a city. It's just different, these back roads are real. Mm-hmm.
You were born there then, in Vermont?
I was born in Rockford, but very shortly after, I think I was a year old or something like that. Okay. They moved with me when I was just a little baby.
And is the military school in Vermont where your mom is the dean? Oh, wow.
Well, she just retired, but
yes.
She
was the dean.
Yeah.
That makes it even more impressive somehow to me that it was there. But just like a woman being the dean of a military college is incredible.
Yeah.
So you're in Vermont, originally with both your parents. Is it just the three of you at that point?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have siblings?
My dad, after he left my mom, I think he was like 53 or 56. He met somebody and had a child with her, but they weren't together very long. And he was raised in Massachusetts, and 20 years difference to me. So we, I love him. I've spent the time with him that I can, but
Yeah.
I don't know what it's like to be a sister, so to speak. I sometimes feel like an auntie. I'm so glad to see him. But that like sibling in the house thing, I've never had.
You didn't have that. Yeah.
No.
So tell me what you remember about growing up being, like under the age of 12 in Vermont.
Yeah. I mean, it was good. Under the age of 12, I mean, It was good. It was like green, and like my water was clean and the air was good. I certainly, if we're talking about racism, which I think like some of those stories sugar down to, had my fair share of, because it's so homogeneously white in Vermont. Like, I feel like we have to set the scene for like what Vermont is for any of your listeners who haven't been there. It's the whitest state in the union by a fraction of a fraction of a fraction with Maine that like alternates every once in a while. And to the point where there's been a lot of reporting done on that. I've reported on it myself, of just like no place like really in America should be like allowed to be this homogenous racially, like you've got to kind of like look at what's going wrong. If in 2024, not only is like a recruitment effort not being made for folks of color, but a retention problem is likely there. Right. So it's not to say that Vermont isn't wonderful. It's just to say, for anybody listening who's Vermonter, like I love Vermont, but it's just to say that if you love Vermont, then you know that this is an issue too.
Right.
So that's just to set the scene. So here comes me. And if you can't see me, because you can't, but maybe you can, I'm pretty light skinned. I do not speak AAVE. I have a lot of like
AAVE?
African American vernacular.
Thank you.
It used to be called Ebonics, I believe, back in our day.
Back in the day. Yeah.
Back in the day. But so I have a lot of privilege associated with like my proximity to whiteness, I would say, but not in a place that is that homogeneously white. If you are anything Black, it stands out in such a stark way. And so, yeah, I got called the N-word a bunch, but I never bothered me so much, because my mom always taught me like people who are saying that like usually got some issues of their own, and they did. And, and that was easy to tell, like, okay, that guy's like screaming the N-word out of the back of his truck on like a Tuesday at noon. Like he's probably got a bad situation going on at home or something like that. Right. But it was the harder stuff was just more, my teachers telling me I was adopted whenever my dad would drop me off at school, and convincing me of it to the point that I would go and I would tell my dad he wasn't my dad.
Oh, wow.
I guess maybe,
Wait, I'm sorry. That's horrifying.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
That really is, that they would take that step, not just to whisper it among themselves, but to tell it to this child.
Right. Yeah.
That this was not her father. This was not her biological father.
Right. You're adopted. No, I'm not. That's my dad. No, you're adopted. No, that's my dad. No, you're adopted. And I'd go home and be like, I'm adopted. My dad'd be like, no, you're not. And I'd be like, prove it. It was awful. That, and then like, gosh, I mean, how deep do you want me to go with this? Like, people don't consider like what racism can really look like. Like, so I got like a body like over one summer. Before that, I was like this really like nerdy kid and happy to just be like playful and whatever. And then, puberty hit and I got like a body over the summer, and really grappling with the dating situation at a really young age. And how, Black women are just like automatically hypersexualized was very strange to me. It's just like, oh, you're like those girls in the rap videos or like whatever it might be. And I, my development up here was not catching up with like what was going on here. And so it was very messed up, but I think I learned the lesson for the first time in Vermont that people can both call you the N-word and date you. They can both hate you and want to sleep with you. Yeah.
Weird.
And so like, yeah, I mean, just imagine like what that does to your like fledgling sexuality. It's the stories of racism, as I'm sure you know, Laura, like they aren't as binary as people think they are. Like somebody did something bad. It's like, no, like I might have dated that guy for 2 years, the guy who hated me and wanted me. Because what do I know about how to change that? So it's taken a lot, I think. I'm a 40-year-old woman now, just turned 40. And
Happy
I think
birthday.
it's just, thank you kindly. Taken a lot for me to like dismantle that, rewire, unwire, self-reflect. And now I've got this little daughter, and I know that my family would love nothing more in the world for us to go live in Vermont. We tried it for a year, and I just kind of want to be a part of the rest of America, you know. Yeah, with the ebb and flow and the function and the dysfunction when it comes to diversity.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing all that. That's you and I, when we spoke a few months ago, I was telling you, because I was raised in Cambridge, Massachusetts, not in an all-white environment. I actually lived in a lower middle class Black neighborhood, which is, I think those are non-existent anymore there. I don't know where they exist, but it was nice, you know, it was nice, but my school was white. And certainly when it came to like, you know, 7 minutes in heaven and spin the bottle and that kind of thing, I've very much felt Black in those moments. Because people kind of switch places to avoid me and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't know what it was about me exactly, but I thought that might be it. But otherwise, I didn't really notice how Black I was. I didn't notice my Blackness most of the time. And my experience with having the N-word shouted out at the back of pickup trucks toward me came later when I lived in Florida. Then it was on. And then it was refusing service. Then it was like, we're charging you more to eat here than your friend. It was like all the stuff. But I didn't really have that growing up. And, you know, Vermont is, and you're going to talk to Scott, you know, for the next interview, but his daughters grew up there, and they both just now, like in the last couple of years, they don't live there for the first time, you know, because they went to school and now, you know, they live other places. But it's, you know, just having them have that experience of having my family, which is a Black family, to visit, and then going back to Vermont. And I know Scott has a couple of stories that he probably wants to tell you and discuss with you, but it's just really interesting because I've never heard the perspective of someone who presents Black, who IDs as Black, who grew up there. I've never had that conversation. And I also think it's really interesting that your mom loves it. You know, that she must have had similar experiences, but there's something about the space and the climate and the water and that she must really love, I'm guessing.
Well, also, I mean, I can't speak for her, but I think there's a generational difference when it comes to like wellness, right? Like, which is how it should go, right? Like I should have a different set of rules for my wellness than she had for hers.
Yeah.
And when I think about my mother's time, I mean, my mom was born in 51, I believe. Brown versus the Board of Education was what, 54?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my mom was born into a time when she wasn't even allowed to go to school, you know, should she have been, you know, age appropriate to go to school at the time. So, and when she was able to go to school, that was a new thing. That was new, like an integrated white school, right? So I think that for her, you know, physical safety mattered a lot. Worrying that the people that are yelling out of the back of the pickup truck might actually like capture you, shoot you, try to play out some weird KKK, you know, trope. Physically like harm you, stalk you, throw stuff on your porch, spray paint your house, make your children's life unbearable. These are realities from her time. And mine is like mental health. You know, I get the privilege of being able to consider my emotional and mental well-being.
Yeah.
because she took that, beating, so to speak, culturally for me. And thus goes, the breaking of cycles of trauma, of generational trauma.
Yeah.
So I don't really know if it was like the atmosphere, or she just liked it better or did whatever, but I don't think that Vermont posed the same threat to her that it did me.
Yes. Yes. Oh, that's such a good way to say it. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Because it makes it really clear, and I can understand it in a way that makes sense to me for both generations. Because I was born in the Negro ward of the Illinois Research Hospital, so I'm like
Wow.
in between you and your mom.
Illinois, gosh, Illinois.
I
What is
know,
up with
right?
Illinois? It still has, listen, we got to report on something on Illinois. We got to go
Yes.
back.
Yes. But like I'm in between the two of you, and then I have my kids who are in their 20s who certainly do not experience racism the way that I did, or my parents, who were both still alive, did. And so I just really like the way you put that. Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
We're rounding up to time, but I want to talk about how you are using your art as a way to look at Blackness. And we talked about humanizing Blackness, or Black stories, right?
Sure.
So tell me, because I know on your website it says something about you wearing like leggings and heels, and you know what I'm talking about. So tell me, like,
my
that
artist
part
website,
of it.
yeah.
Yes.
Well, I would just say that, like, the first step towards, no, I'll stand back. Let me start over. Somebody I know who's just somebody I totally respect in the world of what we now call DEI, but what I would call just very badass, outspoken, Black femme selfism, right? I once like shared with her, like, I just feel like as a singer sometimes, like, I don't really know if I'm like doing much. Like, I sing a lot about love and, heartbreak and all the stuff singers sing about. And like, what am I doing for our people? And she said, just you being on stage, being Black bodied and on stage and being front and center and drawing people together makes you a human being to people, makes them witness you as a human being. And that is humanizing in and of itself for all of us. And I remember like just being just so blown away of just, gosh, isn't it crazy how radical it is just to be Black and exist in places where we didn't get to used to be able to exist, like stages, right? Like white stages, like a place like Vermont, like the radio, right? So it's funny, I would think of this as art, but I don't know that my job would think of it this way, but I'm a podcaster. I went to school, I had 2 degrees, classical piano and journalism. And the 2 most difficult, ways to make a living. I was like, let's try music and journalism. But I'm loving it. And so I have a podcast called Homegoings. And do you know what a homegoing is, Laura?
Well, I know the book.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So tell me.
Yeah. So homegoing is a traditional African American and African Canadian funeral. But the funeral is actually really special because even though somebody has passed, there's all of this celebrating that goes along with it. Lots of singing and dancing and eating and even wailing and expressing in ways that we typically don't get to express ourselves out loud, all in community. And so I named the show Homegoings because it feels like the Black experience is often to walk with like grief and celebration and joy and mourning all intertwined. And like, this is how it is to like wake up every morning, right? That roller coaster of those things we walk with. And I just figured, after the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder, when we were trying to figure out how to grapple with this in public media, I work at Vermont Public, which is the Vermont subsidiary of NPR. We're trying to figure out how to grapple with it. And I was like, well, nobody really wants to be like handed a lesson in how they should be anti-racist in these ways. I mean, maybe some people do, but, and I don't feel like going out and pulsing all these Black people for all their trauma stories. What's the best way to talk about things? How have I always figured out how to talk about hard things? Art. I've always figured out how to do it there. It's this language that you can like use to wrap around hard things and make them more edible, more palatable, softer. So on Homegoings, I started interviewing artists of color about kind of art as a way through, art as a way to contend with both the grieving and the joy of life. And it's taken all sorts of shapes since then. Now it's a lot of me like asking questions about my own experiences and then following that thread through by talking to other people and other artists. And yeah, it's as you said at the top, it's been Boston, New England Emmy nominated twice now. Recently just won a Murrow Award for an episode about Black birth, using my own birth experience as a way into researching. And so, I don't know, I think I'm definitely not the only one in the room who is humanizing us, but I'm doing my part, I think, over my own experiences and my own bodied experience, and by talking to others who I am so like honored and lucky to have as willing to share their experiences with me. So It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah. And I love the image that just being a Black body on stage, whatever that platform might be, whoever talked to you about that was talking about a literal stage, right? You were on a stage performing, but being on, having the podcast as a platform is just another way to be just that. And that by just existing, like you said, in that space, it is powerful, and it is part of the humanization and the destigmatization that exists. Yeah,
and just speaking, just telling our stories. I mean, it's too bad that we have a man named George Floyd to thank for his murder in 2020, for how many opportunities we all got to speak. But I thank him all the time for the brutal and horrific gift of the small incremental awakeness that happened in that moment, to be able to feel valued in our stories. And I worry every day about that value being devalued again. It's almost like I wouldn't have wanted the wound poked once if it wasn't going to be, dealt with. But, as we know, this is slow work, and I'm thankful to be not only humanizing, but to be a human who is being humanized by way of you right now, Laura. So, we're doing this for and with each other too.
I often think about that and how grateful I am. I sold my book in October of 2021, and I'm almost positive that the attention I got, the deal I got, the having it go at auction was because of what had happened culturally in this country, because of his death, because of his murder. And I don't think that my book never would have sold, but I think the way that it went was largely in part of because of what happened after he was murdered. And so I think about that a lot. And sometimes when I say it, I'm surprised that like that was modern day, right? That was 4 years ago.
Right.
In our world. And it took that being on that many video cameras, like that many phones being and even everybody watching till the end. And even still it was disputed, or, but then, like what you just said, it changed things in a way that hopefully, what we're doing, we can continue that momentum that was created when that happened. And it's hard, I think,
It's
right
really
now,
hard.
because I mean, you're in DEI work, yes?
Yes, that's the other like hat I have at my job. I'm the DEIB advisor for our content, to make sure that our content is equitable.
Right. And the B stands for belonging.
Yes.
Right. Which is something that's happened in the last couple of years, at least as far as I know. I hadn't heard that title before then.
The acronym keeps growing. We need to add an F for freedom.
Yes. We had a J on ours for justice at the school, but they took the J off because they felt it was too angry.
All right.
It was hostile. I did not. I was angry when they took the J off, but I wasn't angry when the J was there.
Oh.
But there is less call for the work that you're doing
Mm.
at Vermont Public, right? There's less call for that DEIB work now because a lot of that seems to have died down. The urgency around integration and inclusion and belonging seems to have died down. So
Mm.
I'm very heartened that you're doing this work, you know.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I try to stick to it in a way that sticks to, the editorial process only. So therefore, like if folks are feeling like, I don't know this and I'm ashamed to admit I don't know it and I'm a little worried to ask about it, I can kind of sign on with somebody as a co-pilot and be like, let me research this with you.
Yes.
But yeah, I am thinking about an episode coming up called Dying for DEI. Or I'd like to speak with a lot of Black women who have been fast tracked to a DEI role and then let go simultaneously. As soon as the window was opening, it was closing. And there's a lot of imposter syndrome, and a lot came with that time as well, which is a whole other episode sometime with you and me, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But,
I actually have somebody that I think you could speak with. If you are looking for guests for that, I have somebody that was absolutely hired and then let go. And it was really hard to witness that
Please
happening.
put us in touch.
I
think
will.
like that is a story that needs to be told.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, we have to end, but you mentioned journalism beyond your podcasting. You're also a journalist. Can you just tell us a little bit about that before we close?
Well, right now I am podcasting as a journalist.
Oh, you're
so there's
podcasting,
there's a lot of news in my show is still in news in our organization. Before that, back in the day, I was a print journalist for newspaper, and the journey continues. But I love radio. I love audio. I mix, I engineer, I report, I score, I compose the music I score with. I take a lot of care for each episode. So yeah. And the topics, thank you. The topics take a lot of journalism, takes a lot of investigation sometimes, and exploring and interviewing and listening for hours. I just got off with a Black Trump supporter before I met up with you, a 2.5-hour conversation. So here we go.
I can't wait to hear that episode. Please let me know. Well, actually, I subscribe, so I'll know when it comes out. So
awesome.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Thank you.
So speaking of I subscribe, tell people how they can and where they can find you and all that.
Yeah, of course. Well, anywhere that you get podcasts, you can just put in Homegoings, not to be confused with Homecomings. So, and a lot of people will write and be like, I can't find Homecomings. And I'm like, that's because it's Homegoings. And yes, I chose a complicated name, but I think it's for good reason. So Homegoings, plural, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also go to vermontpublic.org/homegoings and see all the other stuff we have there. I have a newsletter where I take great care again with those to write those from, a place of heart. I also take a lot of the artists from the podcast and put them on stage or record live tapings where we invite audience members. Usually it's like 75 people to a room, and it's just beautiful. So we had Madame Gandhi, MIA's drummer, on the last time, Saiti John Thomas Jr. from Resistance. At the end of the season, I have somebody who's like a they, them, Jewish, Black pole dancer who formerly was an Alvin and Ailey ballerina. So just lots and lots and lots of stuff. So yeah, just check out all the things. And on Instagram at We Are Homegoings. You can find me there. It's usually always me on the other end of anything if you want to write me.
That's great. 75 people in a room is a lot.
Well, we used to have this big blowout, like 300 to 500 people in a room, but I figured if we did it smaller, we could do more. So now it's in our studio at Vermont Public Studios, and I'm hoping to do it more nationally. If you want to do one over by you, Laura, let me know.
Yeah,
they're really fun.
We have so much to talk about after we end the recording.
Yeah, great. So much to connect on.
Myra, thank you for coming on and sharing your story with us, and just having this conversation with me that didn't, it's one of those conversations to navigate that people can shy away from, and you didn't falter or shy away from it. And I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Yeah, I so appreciate it. And thanks for making the safe space, or the space safe enough for me to want to share in this way. I mean, that's part of it as well, Laura. So appreciate all you do.